and welcome to our math summative menu project. Today we are doing comparing and scaling with Eric Egas,
Nathan Lewison, and Max Goldman. So our first slide, we decided to do ratios. A ratio is a number often expressed in a fraction or a colon that compares two quantities. So pretty much the example above, 4 to 3, that's an example of a ratio. And because it's 4 to 3, I'll give you an example below. For example, the amount of concentrate to water when making orange juice. So let's say the concentrate is 4 and the water is 3. That means that we'll have very juicy orange juice. Nathan.
Proportion. A proportion is an equation stating that two ratios are equivalent. An example would be that 1/2 would equal 2/4 because if the denominators are 2 and 4. So the scale factor would be 2 because you multiply both numbers by 2. And they are equal because when you multiply the numbers by 2, they're still the same. They still equal the same number. In the example above, 3/4 equals 6/8 because you would multiply both numbers by 2 to get their proportion.
Part-to-part ratios versus part-to-whole ratios. Part-to-part ratio is of two parts of a total. An example would be 3 over 7. A part-to-whole ratio is a ratio which one part is a part of a whole and the other part is a part too. In a part-to-whole ratio, the one part is a part of a whole and the other part is the whole. Example would be 3 to 10. Example for the part-to-part ratio would be 3 to 7. And the ratio on the example for the part-to-whole ratio would be 3 to 10 if we're using the same example for part-to-part ratio.
Oh. Sorry. So the next slide is use percents to express ratios and proportions. So you can turn any type of ratio into any type of proportion into a percent. It is really not very hard. For example, 1 to 2 is equal to 50%, or 1/2 or 2/4 also can be 50%. Since the proportion is equal, the percent is the same after the conversion. Therefore, percents can be expressed as ratios and proportions.
Conversions between units of measurement. All types of measurements can be converted to other units, like a ratio to a percent or a fraction to a decimal. You can convert 1/2 to 50% because 1/2 is 50/100ths, so it would be 50%. A ratio to a percent is saying that 1 to 3 is equal to 30% or even 1/3.
A scale factor. The scale factor is a tool you must be able to scale a proportion or ratio. It is the number you either do or multiply to get your endpoint. For like if you're doing a proportion like 5/7 from the example below, if you multiply by 4, you get 20. But what you do to the top, you must do to the bottom. So you 7 times 4 is 28, which is a proportion because they are equivalent quantities. And if you read this text right here, it explains it a little more.
A unit rate is a rate where the second number, a denominator, is 1 of a quantity. An example would be 4 to 1 pound. You can also reduce unit rates, but they must be in a scale factor meaning you can multiply both sides to get the same answer. For example, on the example below, the scale factor of this unit rate would be 4. Because if you do 4 days divided by 4, you get 1 day. And if you do 24 divided by 4, you get 6 miles. So they are equal proportion. And yeah.
Comparisons between ratios and proportions. Ratios and proportions can be the same, but they can also be different. There are lots of similarities between the two, though. The proportion states that there are two equal ratios, like 1/2 and 2/4. Proportions show equivalent ratios. And the ratio is comparing two quantities. Quantities like 4 to 3 showing rates. They can be any number and not always equivalent.
Rates, ratios, rates, percents, and fractions. The way to get equivalent representations is to get all the same numbers. You can then convert the numbers to get them into different forms. If you have like 1 and 3, you can divide 1 by 3 to get 1/3 or 33%. In a ratio, it can be 1 to 3 or 3 to 1, depending on the items. The rate of walking is 1 mile in 3 minutes.
So for our project, we did vocab, and here are some of the vocab words that we did. So a ratio, if you didn't understand our presentation, a number that is often expressed in a fraction or a colon comparing two quantities.
And a part-to-part ratio is a ratio that represents a relationship between a whole and another part of the whole.
A part-to-whole ratio is a part-to-whole ratio is a ratio relating one part of the problem to the final product.
Proportion is stating that two ratios are equal.
A rate is a comparison of two quantities measured in two different units, which is called a rate.
A ratio table is a table used to measure many different rate values.
An equation is a rule that's containing an expression.
And the unit rate is a unit rate where the second number is a quantity of 1.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Bye.
Goodbye.